certainly looks like the performing arts in Fayetteville are flourishing.
Pretty amazing. Yeah.
Thanks to it seems like a number of happy circumstances. This wonderful art center and the university, and it seems like the community is thriving.
We're doing well. You know, I wanted to ask both of you, when I look at the Chamber Music Society, which is one of the foremost curators of chamber, or presenters of chamber music, on the website it talks about presenting chamber music somewhat, sort of the history of chamber music through your repertoire. And so when I look at the program here, we start with Mozart, we go to Mendelssohn, and end up with Brahms. I'm sort of interested, from both of your perspective, how do these pieces showcase musically and sort of fit into that mission? Was it, you know, how do you see it? As a clarinetist, it may be slightly different as the violist who puts the groups together, but I'd be interested in both of your perspectives on that.
Paul.
Well, I can tell you this, that these pieces are all, you can't say which one is the best, which is the greatest, because in their own right, they're all amazing. The Mozart E-flat quintet, it starts out, you know, we were talking as we were walking here about brass. It's like two horns starting, bum, 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 and then it's like they're all horns on stage, but it's actually all strings. He must have had, I mean, you'll listen to this piece and you'll say, there is definitely a horn filling to this piece. And as a matter of fact, Mozart did write a horn quintet, but he felt that it would be nice on the strings, and it works incredibly. And E-flat major, one of Mozart's favorite keys, and one of the most, you know, all of Mozart is divine, but this is really up, way up high, is one of the great pieces. And also the thing about Mozart, it's so operatic. All of his pieces, and if you listen to it, you imagine that not only are we horn players, but we're also singers, trading back and forth in the slow movement. There's stuff for the first violin playing, and then someone else goes da 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 do. You can just imagine an opera going on of Mozart. He was so into the opera, and so many of his works had that feeling.
If Haydn was the innovator behind the string quartet, Mozart took that to another great level, and actually Haydn and Mozart inspired one another. But Mozart then went one step further, and for 6 times during his career, throughout his compositional life, added a second viola, and just added another dimension to the string quartet, and he wrote 6 of them. And this is the last one of his last works, really, and certainly his last big scale chamber music piece. It was only written, what, maybe 30 years before the Mendelssohn.
Right. And I guess another connection between Mozart and Mendelssohn is that they were both incredible child prodigies, both lived short lives, and really wrote incredible music at such a young age, both of them. And Mendelssohn even more so than Mozart, actually. If you look at the youthful Mendelssohn, some of the works, like, I don't know what age he wrote the quintet.
It's like 18?
It's something like, yeah, and it's just, it's so mature, there's such depth to the writing that you could see that connection. And the Mendelssohn is pure Mendelssohn, like so many of his work. There's this lightness to it, especially his scherzo movements, like the Midsummer Night's Dream. We all know that. You hear that sort of pitter-patter going through the scherzo of the Mendelssohn Quintet, but also the luscious melodies. And they're 2 viola quintets or string quintets, and it's also the same thing. Which one do you like more? They're both so different. They're both so glorious. But then we have the Brahms quintet, which...
Then instead of a second viola, we have a clarinet, and Brahms... Although it's interesting that Mozart developed the genre of the 2 viola quintet, and then Beethoven wrote a great quintet with 2 violas. Mendelssohn wrote these 2, and then Brahms wrote 2, with 2 quintets with double violas. But we're ending, well, the second half of the concert is a quintet with some different colors infused. clarinet. But Mozart's presence will be felt in a way, even though we're not playing his quintet for clarinet and string quartet. Mozart's quintet with clarinet and string quartet was the model for Brahms 100 years later. So we'll hear a work that was written possibly within a year of Mozart's clarinet quintet with the E-flat major string quintet, and then we'll hear a work that was written 100 years later by Brahms that was influenced by a different quintet of Mozart's. So there's a tie-in there, I suppose, and a different palette, which I think is interesting for the audience, to have the two string quintets and then have a quintet with the addition of clarinet.
Were there other quintets that were written with other woodwind instruments that fall into this genre?
Well, interestingly, Mozart, there's another work that Paul mentioned, a horn quintet for horn and string quartet, but it's really a hybrid work because it's a string quartet with two violas. So that's a really mellow piece, as the horn and two violas, and one violin and a cello. And throughout, after Mozart's clarinet quintet, there have been any number of wonderful works for string quartet with a wind instrument, and it's actually my favorite genre. My favorite thing to do is to play as the kind of the fifth wheel with a string quartet, to have the opportunity to blend the sound of a clarinet with strings. And Brahms, as did Mozart, it uses the clarinet in a way that sometimes it blends with the strings, and where you have to play in the inner voices as if it were a second viola in the group, and then sometimes as a soloist in relief, and sometimes just like a chameleon, in and out of both roles, playing as part of the ensemble and then being the other in the group.
And what about that gypsy moment of the piece? I mean, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, should I talk about that? And then I'd like you to talk about gypsy music too,
Okay.
because that's one of his specialties.
But
But the work is modeled after Mozart's quintet from 100 years earlier, with a big sonata form first movement, an exquisite slow movement, and then instead of a minuet movement as Mozart did, he's got a movement that has a very lyric A section and then a kind of a scherzo middle section. But then Brahms, for the fourth movement, writes a theme and variations, much as Mozart did in his quintet. But Mozart's quintet, the slow movement, is one of the most beautiful arias that just happens to be for strings and clarinet. One of the most beautiful songs that is just seamless and perfect. Brahms wrote just a gorgeous, serene, exquisitely beautiful slow movement. But when you get to the middle of it, suddenly everything changes, and instead of singing a song, in a kind of an operatic way, the clarinet turns into a gypsy instrument. It plays cadenzas and this florid ornamental writing that is just all over the instrument. And these strings take on a role that is very different for a string quartet, that sounds more like a percussion instrument that you may have seen, the cimbalum, which looks like the inside of a piano strings and played with these very lightweight hammers with tremolos and trills. And you'll see the strings almost drop. Why don't you talk about those effects on the string
Well, the thing
instrument?
is that if you see a gypsy band, there are not too many gypsy bands in this country anymore, probably not. But in any case, your typical gypsy band might have a violin playing the lead, and then there maybe be a viola, bass, and a cymbalum. And that would be the basic group. And the cymbalum, as you said, is hitting this, and some of them are just unbelievable. I remember being in Budapest at a restaurant, tourists, I guess for the tourists, because they put on a blindfold on the cymbalum player. And he's like going, and then they wave some money in front of its blindfold, and he plays faster and faster. I know, the cheap tourist trick, but it worked. He got more tips. So, but in any case, the sound is. If you listen to that, if you go on YouTube or whatever, you hear gypsy music with a real authentic gypsy band, you'll hear this. What is that instrument? It's a cymbalum, and there's going, and that's what Brahms, of course, heard gypsies quite often and wrote Hungarian dances or folk. He stole from the gypsies stole from, they were all stealing from each other, the tunes. And that's when you listen to some Brahms music, it's based on the folk tunes, and sometimes that's coming from the gypsies, and the gypsies also would take the music, the classical tunes, and so it's all intermeshed. But in any case, we could assume that he heard gypsy bands quite often, and part of that is that cymbalum, and that's what we're imitating. And when we go da 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 da, and he's going, that's the spot. And say, oh, that's the spot he was talking about.
He plays it even better than he sings it.